Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we're taking a quick look at Nvidia's new GeForce RTX 3070 Ti laptop GPU, the second of two new GPU refreshes for 2022's mobile gaming systems. We already covered the 3080 Ti on the channel earlier, so a lot of this video will be seeing how the lower tier model compares to Nvidia's new flagship and the rest of the laptop GPU landscape across a range of games.
Today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Gigabyte and their brand new range of Intel B660 motherboards. A particular favourite of ours is the B660M Aorus Pro AX, as this micro ATX board really does pack it all. A powerful VRM comprised of a dozen 60amp power stages, complete with impressive looking and very effective aluminium heatsinks. There's loads of USB ports on the I/O panel, Wi-Fi 6, Intel 2.5 gigabit LAN, and plenty of onboard expansion options. Also, Gigabyte has a competition running right now to win a free Aorus upgrade, so please do check the link in the video description.
The RTX 3070 Ti is based on Nvidia's Ampere GA104 silicon. It increases the number of SMs from 40 in the older RTX 3070 up to 46 with the Ti model, getting very close to the full 48 SMs available with the RTX 3080 laptop GPU. This brings with it 5,888 CUDA cores. However, to fit this larger core count into the same 80 to 125 watt power range, clock speeds have been reduced down to a maximum of 1485 MHz rated boost in the 125 watt configuration. The memory subsystem, offering 8 GB of GDDR6 clocked up to 14 gigabits per second, remains identical to the RTX 3070. So on paper, the new RTX 3070 Ti laptop sits between the 3080 and 3070 as you'd expect, getting very close to the 3080 in terms of core configuration, but featuring power configurations more in line with the 3070. It's also important to note the laptop 3070 Ti is not the same as the desktop card. The desktop model has 2 more SMs, higher clock speeds, and faster GDDR6X memory, and in general will perform a lot better. The naming here is a bit confusing and misleading in my opinion, but that's nothing new for an Nvidia laptop GPU. The test platform for today's video was provided by XMG and their partner Uniwil. You can check out their new range of 2022 laptops via the links in the description. The GM5A G7Y chassis on hand for today features a 15-inch 1440p 240Hz display, Intel Core i7-12700H processor, and 32GB of DDR5 memory in a dual-stick configuration. The RTX 3070 Ti is configured at the maximum available power rating that Nvidia offers, 125 watts plus 5 watts of dynamic boost. But just to be clear here, there are multiple configurations of the RTX 3070 Ti that will all have the same advertised name but different power limits. An 80 watt configuration in a slimmer, smaller laptop will be significantly slower than the results we show today, which are representative of high power flagship laptops. For testing, we'll be benchmarking and comparing GPUs at 1080p with the display connected to the iGPU. This is the most limited configuration and is how many laptops are run in a hybrid or Optimus mode. Then we also have 1440p results with the GPU connected directly to the display, which is the most GPU limited and representative of laptops with a mux switch or external display. We're going to kick off the testing here with Watch Dogs Legion. This game performs really well on the 3070 Ti at 1080p using ultra settings, outperforming the RTX 3080 by a few percent, though still sitting 8% behind the new 3080 Ti. In total, we're seeing 16% better performance than the 115 to 130 watt configuration of the RTX 3070, which has essentially shifted this class of laptop up a tier compared to the previous generation, giving us a more comfortable buffer above 60 FPS on average. At 1440p, the results aren't quite as favourable for the 3070 Ti, with this new model now slipping a few percent behind the RTX 3080 and much closer to the previous generation 3070. However, the gap to the 3080 Ti remains pretty similar at a 10% deficit here, so among this grouping of higher end GPUs, it's quite a close battle between the various options, and you really can't go wrong for this game. Like with the 3080 Ti versus 3080, the RTX 3070 Ti struggles a little compared to the 3070 in Metro Exodus. Average performance with the configurations we tested was roughly the same, but 1% low performance was a bit behind at 1080p. The 3070 Ti ended up 6% slower than the 3080 Ti in this game using ultra settings. And the situation doesn't really change all that much when benchmarking at 1440p using an external display. The 3070 Ti and 3070 are still very close in overall performance, with the 3070 Ti just marginally behind. Meanwhile, the gap to the 3080 Ti has grown somewhat, now sitting 9% behind Nvidia's flagship tier of laptop GPUs. Unfortunately, the new Ti model just isn't offering much here. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a good result for the 3070 Ti, coming in only a few FPS behind the RTX 3080 laptop and RX 6800M from AMD on average. At 1080p, the new Ti model was 11% faster than the non-Ti model from last year and just 3% slower than the 3080. However, with a 12% gap to the 3080 Ti, you're not quite getting flagship levels of performance here. At 1440p, the 3070 Ti sits a lot closer to the 3070 than the 3080 and 3080 Ti. It's only 5% faster than the older 3070 model and 14% behind the 3080 Ti. This GPU is still very capable of playing Red Dead Redemption 2 at 1440p though, easily achieving a 60 FPS average using high settings. In Cyberpunk 2077, the new 3070 Ti is faster than the RTX 3070, claiming a 5% margin at 1080p. Like in Red Dead, there's roughly a 12% gap to the higher RTX 3080 Ti, which in this title is about a 10 FPS difference, not earth-shattering, but enough of a gap so that the 3080 Ti makes sense. But on the other hand, you can see a sizable gap when comparing, say, the 3070 Ti to the 3060, so I guess there's various ways to look at this result. At 1440p though, the 3070 Ti is a lot less impressive, only able to match the 3070 in overall performance. It doesn't fall behind like we see when comparing the 3080 Ti to the 3080, but I would have expected to see a performance gain with this new laptop model. In Horizon Zero Dawn, the 3070 Ti is decently faster than the 3070, and this is one of the largest margins we've seen so far, 16% in favour of the new model. It's still slower than the 3080 Ti to the tune of 12%, but this appears to be a game that scales well to the higher CUDA core count available with the 3070 Ti. And while the margin between various GPUs tends to shrink at 1440p, the 3070 Ti is still 11% ahead of the 3070 in this game. However, it doesn't close the gap much to the 3080 and 3080 Ti configurations, with those GPUs benefiting from a higher maximum allowed power configuration of 150 watts versus just 125 watts for the 3070 Ti. With this generation of laptops, you're generally going to be getting both a GPU and CPU upgrade, and this is evident in a couple of games like Hitman 3. Using the Dubai benchmark at 1080p, the 3070 Ti configuration is significantly faster than previous models, 28% faster when paired with the Core i7-12700H, compared to the RTX 3070 with Ryzen 9 5900HX. This is a combination of both CPU and GPU performance gains, helping to alleviate the bottleneck at high frame rates while also delivering more GPU headroom. As you can see, this margin falls away significantly when comparing at 1440p, which is less CPU limited. It's still a great result for the 3070 Ti, 14% faster than the 3070, but the margin to the 3080 Ti using the same 12700H CPU is no different to other games we've looked at. Similar story when looking at Rainbow Six Siege. The game is fully CPU limited at 1080p, but when we focus exclusively on 1440p numbers, we see the 3070 Ti fall pretty comfortably between the 3070 and 3080 configurations. The 3070 Ti is able to crank out over 240 FPS using medium settings in this title, which is perfect for the latest generation of 1440p 240Hz laptop panels. The rest of the benchmarks we're showing are using new data we've collected over the last few months, so I'm going to focus on the GPU-limited 1440p results because they make the most sense for this class of GPU. And kicking this section off is Assassin's Creed Valhalla. We had to throw out our old data for this game as Ubisoft released a major update that significantly improved performance on Nvidia GPUs. In this title, there's not much of a gap between the 3070 Ti and 3080 Ti, so my recommendation would be just to get the 3070 Ti if you're a big Valhalla player. In Far Cry 6, the 3070 Ti ends up 9% behind the 3080 Ti, but either configuration is good for over 60 FPS on average using ultra settings. The 8GB VRAM buffer is right on the edge with this title using the HD texture pack at this resolution and settings, so ideally the 3070 Ti would include more VRAM for 1440p gaming, but most of the time this isn't that significant of an issue. In Guardians of the Galaxy, the 3070 Ti is a strong performer, offering over 100 FPS on average. It does end up 12% slower than the RTX 3080 Ti, but this is a very common performance margin between these GPUs. If you're really keen, you can enable DLSS to further improve performance. Deathloop is another title where there's about a 10 FPS gap between the 3070 Ti and 3080 Ti when playing at 1440p. Both GPUs are capable of a 60 FPS experience using ultra settings at this resolution though, which is very much a high-end experience on a laptop. Forza Horizon 5 was a bit of a surprise, as the performance delta between the 3070 Ti and 3080 Ti configuration is quite small, most similar to what was seen in Assassin's Creed Valhalla. I'm not too sure why this would be the case, but I triple checked the results and the same margin came up each time, and I don't believe it's a CPU limitation. Might be due to some other aspect of the design. Resident Evil Village showcases the 10 FPS margin between the 3080 Ti and 3070 Ti once again, although in this instance the percentage difference sees the 3070 Ti end up 9% slower. There's probably not too much point detailing more games, as we've seen this sort of margin on more than one occasion, so let's finish off the review with a look at ray tracing performance. Far Cry 6 uses fairly modest ray tracing effects which are easy to run on most GPUs. In the case of the RTX 3070 Ti, even when we continue using the Ultra preset and turn on all the ray tracing effects, the GPU is still capable of over a 60 FPS average, and that's without using image scaling techniques like FSR. We're only 8% slower than the 3080 Ti here too, which isn't too bad. Guardians of the Galaxy ray tracing isn't so favourable. Using the maximum ray tracing effects in conjunction with the Ultra preset leads to an average frame rate below 60 FPS, 15% slower than the RTX 3080 Ti. However, as mentioned previously, this game supports DLSS, so when using the quality mode, it's quite easy to get that frame rate back up over 60 FPS with only a small loss to visual quality, which is especially hard to spot on a laptop-sized display. And lastly, we have Deathloop, a game with ray-traced shadows. Decent results on show here as well, with the 3070 Ti keeping its average frame rate up over 60 FPS without using DLSS or FSR in this title. However, the performance delta to the 3080 Ti is rather large, so for the best experience, you might want to consider Nvidia's best GPU. Like with the RTX 3080 Ti that we reviewed earlier, it's tricky to form an opinion on the RTX 3070 Ti laptop GPU. From a standalone performance perspective, it performs quite well and is well suited to the latest generation of laptops with 1440p displays. Even when gaming using ultra settings or with ray tracing enabled, the RTX 3070 Ti is capable of around a 60 FPS experience or better across a variety of titles, which I think is pretty decent for a laptop GPU. Compared to other GPUs, there's a few good things and a few disappointing things here. On the good side, the 3070 Ti is able to close the gap to Nvidia's best laptop GPU relative to previous generations, or half generations. With the 3080 versus 3070, we were getting about a 20% margin at 1440p. That's dropped to just a 12% margin when comparing 3080 Ti versus 3070 Ti, albeit with a different selection of games. A lot of this is down to the 3080 Ti being a pretty unimpressive upgrade on the 3080, while the 3070 Ti is slightly more decent in that area. But I say slightly more decent for a reason. The RTX 3070 Ti is hardly an earth-shattering upgrade on the RTX 3070 that came before it. It's a little over 10% faster at 1080p and a little under 10% faster at 1440p. These are not the sort of margins that make the 3070 Ti a must-buy over the 3070. As is always the case with laptops, the value equation is tricky to pin down, as we're often looking across different generations, which also differ in CPU, display, and so on, but Nvidia are claiming the RTX 3070 Ti should start in $1,500 US laptops versus $1,300 for the RTX 3070, $2,000 for the RTX 3080, and $2,500 for the RTX 3080 Ti. At these MSRPs, not sure whether you'd actually call it an MSRP or just price guidance, it's an absolute no-brainer to go with the 3070 Ti over the 3080 and 3080 Ti. It's just 10% slower or thereabouts for at least 25% less cash. The 3080 Ti looks like particularly horrible value going on Nvidia's numbers, and a quick check of real-world laptop pricing confirms this to be the case. Avoiding the 3080 Ti is a very easy recommendation to make. It's much harder to make a recommendation between the 3070 Ti and 3070. Nvidia says 3070 Ti laptops should be 15% more expensive, but I wouldn't want to pay anything over 10% more for a pure gaming system. To justify a margin greater than that, I'd also be wanting a faster CPU, more storage space, or some other system configuration upgrade. The Ti variant just isn't quite enough of a gain to justify a modest price difference, and if anything, settling on the 3070 for less cash could be a viable option. There's also AMD GPUs to consider. The nearest competitor I've tested is the Radeon RX 6800M, and we're set to get a refreshed lineup of 6000M series GPUs in the early parts of this year. The 6800M is only available in now last gen laptops at this point, but it's a fair bit cheaper than 3070 Ti models. Now Nvidia does have a superior ray tracing performance advantage and DLSS also in their favor, but AMD's pricing is pretty aggressive, so that's also something that I would be considering for sure over the 3070 Ti. Anyway, that's it for this look at the GeForce RTX 3070 Ti laptop GPU with some comparisons to other products. If you're interested in supporting the channel and our independent testing, we do have our Patreon and Floatplane accounts. Links to those are in the description below, as well as links where you can check pricing through various retailers. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.